This is it. We've got 5 top-tier flagship phones, including the new iPhone XS and the new iPhone XS Max. Welcome to the battery comparison. I'm also launching a giveaway, 2 iPhone XSs and 1 XS Max, and it's very simple to enter. I'll leave the rules in the description below. Alright, we're going to be testing 5 smartphones here, the 2 new iPhones versus last year's offering, compared to the best from Samsung and OnePlus. I'm going to add in the specifications of each phone, and we will talk about how each of these aspects affects the battery life you are getting. But to start with, just have a look at the battery capacity as the top figure, and you will notice interestingly that the iPhone XS has a smaller battery capacity than the iPhone X. This is particularly unusual because this is a more powerful smartphone, and yet Apple claims it still manages to last longer than the X. We shall see. Alright, so if you've been keeping up with what I've been doing on these phones, I've just pulled up Instagram on all 5 devices. Pretty basic, but at the same time, something that pretty much everyone uses on a regular basis. And currently, both Android phones are looking like a bit of a joke. The Galaxy Note 9 has fallen to 94, the OnePlus 6 96, while all 3 iPhones are still showing 100%. But we've talked about this before, we know this is something that Apple does, and their iPhones may very well show 100%, but that's unlikely to be true. As we switch this up for something a little heavier, it's worth noting one more thing. The Samsung Galaxy Note 9 came in first place in the last battery test I did, but in that test I was using the phone on its default Full HD Plus resolution. Whereas here, because we're now competing against a phone like the iPhone XS Max, which has a resolution that's well above 1080p, it seems unfair to pull the Note 9 down like that, so that phone is now operating at its full Quad HD resolution. Theoretically, it should still last longer. Its display is actually a tiny bit smaller than the XS Max, not to mention its battery capacity about 20% larger. But right now it's not looking that way. In fact, the Note 9 is already trailing very far behind the other smartphones. As we pull up PUBG, you'll notice another peculiarity. The iPhone XS Max is actually behind the iPhone XS. You would expect the XS Max to last longer. Sure, its display is larger and resolution higher, but its battery capacity is so much bigger, it should be able to compensate. So maybe this is just variance we see at the beginning, and it will correct itself over the course of the test. I should also let you know on a bit of a side note that this iPhone XS giveaway that I'm running, I will also be adding 3 upcoming Honor smartphones to it, and it's something pretty special. You'll find out in about a week's time. So if you do decide to enter after watching this video, there are 6 prizes up for grabs. Now, the current remaining levels of battery is showing us an interesting trend. With every plus-sized iPhone that I've ever tested, the Plus model, or the Max model in this case, has always lasted significantly longer than the standard one, but that doesn't seem to be happening here. While of course there's still time in this test for the phone to pull ahead, it's clear that it's not in a different league altogether. At the same time, you might have also been paying attention to the Note 9, which has been silently slipping away in the background. It would seem like this shift in resolution from Full HD Plus to Quad HD Plus has really affected it. Bear in mind though that we're pitching it against phones which all have good battery life. Something interesting here, after I started running this benchmark, you'll notice all 3 iPhones have dimmed their displays. This is a defense mechanism against overheating, and every time it was happening, what I do is reboot all 5 phones and then continue the test. For a bit of a visual change, instead of just using Antutu benchmark, we're also using 3D Mark here, specifically the Slingshot benchmark, which is made for the more powerful phones on the market. Not going to be an issue here, of course. And after about 30 minutes of this benchmark, it's almost accelerated to some of the results we expect to see. For example, the XS Max is now 1 percentage point higher than the XS, and now last year's X is slipping behind. While that phone doesn't have bad battery life, in this group of smartphones we would expect it to run out first. Alright, so all we've been doing is a bit of mild YouTube watching. Not very demanding on the smartphones themselves, but a good test of how efficient the displays are. And this could very well be one area in which the iPhone XS and XS Max are managing to pull ahead of last year's smartphones. The iPhone 8 used an LED backlit LCD display, but this time round both devices are using Super AMOLED panels, which essentially allow black pixels to be turned off as opposed to just lighting them black. So this means less pixels need to be on at any one time, and therefore a little bit of battery life is expected to be saved. And this is why you'll find that a lot of phones that come with AMOLED or OLED displays often have a dark mode built into them, where the menus are black, or you might have wallpapers with a significant part of the image is black, as you now do with the XS and the XS Max. So we've just finished recording some 4K video on all the phones. This doesn't seem to really hurt battery life too much, and it's really gaming and benchmarks that accelerate this downwards trajectory. The XS Max is now 2 percentage points higher than the XS. Still nothing dramatic, but I suppose at this point unambiguously ahead. Meanwhile, Apple's 2017 iPhone X is now on 30%, whereas the Note 9 is just behind on 29%. So it's probably only a matter of time before the X scoots past the Samsung in this race to zero. From the X, the XS is hardly a polar shift in terms of the specs you're getting. You've got the same size display, same resolution, and a smaller battery capacity, not to mention more RAM. And yet, the XS is so far ahead of the X in terms of remaining battery capacity that it really makes you think the A12 is a massive leap forward in terms of energy efficiency. Mind you, even if you compare the iPhone X to Samsung's Galaxy Note 9, while the X has now slipped behind, if you look at the amount of battery life you're getting per milliamp hour of battery, that phone is leagues ahead of Samsung's offering. And, well, the XS is even better. As you can see now, the iPhone X is on its last legs, so we're pulling up YouTube for one final last stretch before it eventually calls it a day. The XS Max still has 17% left, which is definitely a fair lead, but at the same time means that these phones are fairly closely tied. In some past battery tests on the Mr. Who's the Boss channel, we've seen differences between first and last place as much as 30 percentage points. So compared to that, all 5 phones here offer comparable battery life. It's not long before the OnePlus 6 calls it quits, and undoubtedly hot on its heels will be the Note 9 with only 3% remaining. And you might be thinking, wait a sec, on the Note 9 versus OnePlus 6 battery test, the Note 9 beat that phone by a fair margin. What's happened this time around? The difference primarily stems from the Note 9 being set to its full Quad HD Plus resolution this time. Whereas the OnePlus 6 has the luxury of being a 1080p display, Samsung's Galaxy Note 9, when at its full resolution, is pushing about twice as many pixels, and of course that's going to hurt battery. So now the Galaxy Note 9 is out too, we've just got the iPhone XS on 3% and the XS Max on 9%. And it only takes a few minutes of an Antutu benchmark for the XS now to call it a day. So the Max is the winner, but I suppose more interesting than that would be to have a look at the times that each phone managed to last, and then make some sort of comparative statement. Also, on a bit of a side note, you might have noticed that the XS Max is scoring over 300,000 points on Antutu, and in fact I remember one benchmark I ran, it got 340,000. That's a whole 30% more than phones with the Snapdragon 845 like the OnePlus 6, or phones with the Exynos 9810 like the Note 9. Alright, so in 5th place, no surprise to anyone, was the iPhone X. Whilst initially it looked like it was going to give the 2 Android phones a run for their money, towards the end of the test the battery life really started to fly off. This was then followed by the OnePlus 6, which managed to pull ahead especially at the end and last a whole half an hour longer. This is what I'd consider good battery life. The Galaxy Note 9 was next, lasting a whole 3 minutes longer than that phone, which on one hand is good, but on the other hand isn't great, because its battery capacity is about 20% larger than the OnePlus, and even more so compared to the iPhone XS. Speaking of which, that phone managed to last 10 minutes longer than the Note 9, which, credit where due, is really impressive. Admittedly, it started to fall quite quickly